Hello, this is Oscar Hines. Welcome to Ninja Talks. Again, we are going to cover an interesting subject today, and for those of you joining us for the first time, the Ninja Talks is really about understanding communication at a different level, understanding how it affects us and how we can affect it in our interactions with other people. You know, I was taking a walk this morning in my favorite park, and something quite interesting, a memory came back to me. And I wanted to share that with you today as part of our discussion. Some years ago, as a single parent, I had 3 young children, and of course, as most of you know, that our parents, you've got to keep them entertained. My children are now young adults, but back then they were probably around 12 and 10 and 8. Respectively, and I was moving. And what was interesting was that I had a jacuzzi that was roughly around 8 feet in circumference. It was a round jacuzzi that sat in my backyard that we never used. And my son, who loves to catch little fish, one day we went out and he caught a bunch of little fish and he put it in this bucket. And of course, he left because they were visiting with their mom for the weekend. And I looked outside and I realized these poor fish are going to die if I leave them in this bucket. I didn't have a fish tank. So since I didn't use this jacuzzi, I threw all the fish into this jacuzzi. Well, we kind of forgot about them. The summer went by, and of course, it was actually convenient because all the little mosquito larvae that normally form were getting eaten up by these fish, so we had no mosquitoes in the backyard. So it worked for me. Anyway, my son loved it because now he had a giant kind of terrarium type deal that he was working with. And so I ended up about 2 or 3 years later getting ready to move out of this house. Now again, this is 3 years later. So I'm thinking these fish must have certainly died because we went through summers and winters, and even here in Houston, the winters can get a little bit cool. It can freeze over a little bit. So I'm thinking these fish are dead. Well, to my surprise, I walk out to the jacuzzi as I'm packed up and ready to leave, and I realize that there's a teeming bunch of fish inside this jacuzzi. And I mean like 100 of them. So by now, this is springtime, and I'm blown away. So I decide, you know what, kids? We're going to show you guys how to respect life. So what I told them is, I'm going to suck all the water out of here. We're going to get it lower so we can catch these fish. I want you guys to grab your nets. We're going to put them all in buckets, and we're taking them back to the pond that we originally found them in, which was my favorite park that I referenced that I was in this morning. And this is what got this memory percolating for me again. So we capture what amounts to maybe 130 fish or something, these little guppies. And we take them in about 2 big buckets back to the pond. Now here's where it really gets interesting. So we take these fish, we pour them out of the buckets into the pond that they originally came from, and something completely unexpected happened. These fish formed into a perfect circle, 8 feet in diameter to be exact, in the exact shape of my jacuzzi. I kid you not. So now we're looking at these fish and they're swimming around inside that 8-foot circumference. And so at this point, 5 minutes go by, they're still doing it. So we start taking little rocks and we start throwing it in the middle of the circle to disperse them. And when we threw a rock, they would disperse around the rock, but they would stay inside that circle. And it was phenomenal. Literally 30 minutes went by, and they stayed in this circle. And then something really interesting happened. One of the fish, a particularly big one, he swam around, and then he seemed to find what looked like, in his mind perhaps, a hole. And he shot through the left side of this circle and disappeared. And all the other fish teamed around and they started looking as if he disappeared through the wall or something. Now bear in mind, they're in a big pond. There is no wall, there are no barriers, but they are formed in this exact circle. So then what happens? Another fish swims around and then goes out that same exact hole. Now, another one, and then another one. And before you know it, they literally started pouring out of that one little section on the left as if that was some kind of doorway to the rest of the pond. It was the most phenomenal thing I'd ever seen. Until after about 3 or 4 minutes, most of them were gone and a few of them were still sort of lingering around inside that circle, almost dumbfounded, like they were wondering, where did the other fish go? So anyway, here's the point of this story. Human beings are very much like those fish. You see, we have imaginary constructs that are created around what we perceive as our realities. Now, many of you will concur, but let me give you a further point that you can think about to really substantiate this. Back in 1956, and some of you may have heard of this example, a gentleman by the name of Roger Bannister did something that no one had ever done before. You see, the conventional medical community at that time believed that if someone tried to run a mile in more than 4 minutes, that their heart would explode in their chest and they would immediately die, okay? So no one ever thought that a 4-minute mile was possible, except one man from England by the name of Roger Bannister. He started practicing, and every day he visualized himself passing or crossing the finish line at 3 minutes and 59 seconds, a feat that up until then had never been accomplished. And sure enough, as many of you know, he beat and won the 4-minute mile. That next year, approximately 6 other athletes broke the 4-minute mile. And not only that, but high school students started running faster than 4 minutes in a mile. It was never done before. Now, you could say that people came to some new realization, but what happened was there was a limiting belief, and that limiting belief finally was disproven. Now, those fish that were inside of this circle, they believed that a boundary was there. Because I want you to think about this. The fish were not the original fish that were thrown in there. Remember, they lived in this terrarium, for a lack of a better word, aquarium, for 3 years. So these were generation after generation of fish that never knew anything but those boundaries that they came up in. They never knew that there was a pond. They never conceived of a pond that would go across 100 yards, which is roughly the size of this pond. All they knew was the circumference that they were in. Now, here's the point. Human beings have limiting beliefs when it comes to how they communicate. And what I want to do is I want to challenge you to start thinking about communication in a different way. You see, we've all been conditioned, and we've been conditioned from the very beginning, just like those fish that were born in that pond. Literally, what happened is we sat in a school. Remember, fish travel in schools. That's instinctual. They do that for survival. Because if they travel in a school, they look like one large animal, so the fish that would prey on them tend to avoid them when they're in a compact school. But, and this is interesting, we were conditioned by school as well. And I mean that in a literal sense. You see, back in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was beginning. And there was a gentleman by the name of Horace Mann. And Horace Mann is highly reputed as being the founder of the modern educational system. And so what he quickly realized is that we were moving into the Industrial Revolution, and they needed workers. They needed workers, for an example, think about 1908, the Model T Ford. Think about the automation lines where everything went on and one person put on this bolt every day, all day. This person put on this piece, this person put on that piece, and the assembly line allowed them to assemble different parts of an engine, for an example, in rapid succession over the course of several weeks rather than several months. And so modern industrialism was born. The education system mimicked what was needed for workers to conform to that system. So schoolhouses were arranged a particular way. Young people had to get in a straight line. If they needed something, they had to raise their hands to be excused. When the period was over, a bell rung that told them to go from this period to that period. They had to keep everything inside their desks neat and in order. And so the modern educational system was born, teaching us how to conform. Now that conformity has continued down to modern day. Everything has changed around us. Model T Fords are a far cry from a Tesla that drives around on the street today. Look at the buildings. The buildings are now huge skyscrapers with beautiful glass and steel and architectural feats that never was possible based on our limited technology before. Look at the microchip. Look at the cell phone. Look at the cell phone versus what Alexander Graham Bell called a telephone way back in the early 1900s. You see, we have to understand that everything has changed except our educational system, because there is still this mindset that we need to continue to conform to a certain way of thinking. Now, I said all of that to say this, that communication is something that we once believed consisted of us speaking, someone listening, maybe looking at us, and that was it. But that's not it. You see, modern communication is all about a series of different senses that we have in our bodies. We sense people's energy, we see their body language, we see their facial expressions, we see their or sense their smell, we even touch them and we feel energy when we touch each other. So I want to challenge you to start thinking about communication in a different way. I want to challenge you to start thinking about how when you walk into a room, you connect with every single soul inside that room. There is an energy frequency, an energy signature. And if you don't believe that, look at the speakers that are on platforms today. Look at some of the political leaders. They get up in front of an audience and they begin to speak with passion and energy. Now watch that audience. Watch how their behavior begins to mimic the speaker. Watch how they begin to respond and clap and applaud and engage. And not just that, but watch the people around them. You see, it is virtually impossible, unless someone's conscious of this, to stay inside of a room of people that feel a certain way and not be in some shape, form, or fashion influenced by that individual. And so, or those individuals. And so what that tells us is that we are picking up not just on what's being said, but what's being felt, on the vibrational frequencies that are being emitted from other people. And when a powerful speaker gets up on a platform and begins to speak and orate with energy and intensity, we start to respond to that. And those responses are the things that influence our thought processes. So my challenge to you is this. Try this little exercise. Next time you're in a room of people, try to pull away in a corner somewhere. Take a couple of deep breaths. Breathe in through your nose. Hold it for 3 seconds. exhale through your mouth. Again, a hold for 3 seconds. Exhale through your mouth. What that's going to do is it's going to begin to slow down your heart rate. It's going to begin to center your energy. And it's going to begin to allow you to focus. Now, if you can move away from the crowd a little bit, but still be in the room, create an invisible force field or a bubble around you. Just imagine that you're insulated and there's this protective bubble and nothing's coming in and nothing's going out. You are an island onto yourself. Now, when you achieve that state, begin to look around the room and watch the behaviors of those in that room. And something really interesting will happen. You will go from an active participant to an objective observer. And when you begin to observe individuals inside that space, you will begin to see behaviors that mimic the person that's influencing the space at the time, whether that be a speaker or a group or some individuals that are highly esteemed. They will begin to influence the dialogue in that group, and the individuals that are being influenced will behave in a certain way. They will show certain body language. They'll close off their body language. They'll show submission. They will insulate themselves if they feel vulnerable. They'll blink their eyes a certain time. They'll avert the vision or stare of the dominant person in that room. If they are a superior to a subordinate, you will see all of those things start materializing before your very eyes. Now, when you see that, you are going to be an objective observer watching a behavior that you can now monitor and qualify what you're seeing. That's the beginning of ninja communications. When you can separate yourself from what you're involved in and begin to really see individuals in their behavior and what they're actually thinking, because people react and behave a certain way when they are being influenced by others. Try that little exercise. Do it on a regular basis if you can. And something is going to happen inside of you mentally. You will be able to separate yourself from what you're seeing, even when you are a participant. And then there'll be a third consciousness in the room. Your little ninja will start to grow. They'll sit right on this shoulder here, and it'll start growing, and you will start seeing things you've never seen before, recognizing things you've never recognized before, and more specifically, you will start calling individuals out on things that they are doing to try to influence you so that you can influence them. And what we're going to do with our Ninja Talks podcast is we're going to show you very specific techniques to start affecting change, not only in your life, but in the lives of the people that you want to affect in their behaviors and in your interactions with them. So, as I conclude today, I want you to think about those fish in that pond and recognize that all of us have been conditioned from the time we were very young. We were born into an ecosystem that established certain rules that we grew up believing was a reality, when in the truth, they weren't a reality. In truth, they were someone's determination of what they wanted us to believe, and we've begun to believe that, and we've accepted that as our truth. When in truth, your communication ability allows you to virtually read the minds of people around you once you understand what you're looking for. So I want you to think about that and start getting in touch with your inner ninja. This is Oscar Hines. To find out more, I want to invite you to go to ninjatalks.com. That's ninjatalks.com, or simply go to oscarhines.com. There is a book called Ninja Communications, The Art and Science of Influence. And this book details all of the specific points so that you can follow along in this podcast. I want to encourage you to share it with friends, family, people that you know. And for those of you who have corporations and businesses, we would love to come out and do the Ninja Masterclass. The Masterclass allows you to turn your company into a group of ninjas. I want to thank you for listening today. My name is Oscar Hines. Stay observant, stay focused, and you will access your inner ninja. Thank you for joining me.